Hey everyone, welcome to the Village Whitby Online. Jonathan over here. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for hitting pause on your life, hitting play on this video. For the whole month of August, the Village is not meeting in person at Robert Munch Public School where we normally meet. We take that month off for Sunday mornings. Basically, it's really warm. People are just hit and miss. They're traveling everywhere, and we love to give our volunteers a break. So you may have watched last week's, hopefully, and the week before, but we're doing this online series called One-on-One. And so every week we're introducing and chatting with, interviewing one person from our church community. And so this week, really excited that you get to hear Joey Fletcher. Wonderful human being, one of the most humble people that you'll meet. He'll never tell you that, of course, because otherwise he wouldn't be humble if he told you that. And really looking forward to this conversation, the questions that we're going to be talking about: family, faith, work, even questioning and doubting and all that stuff. Looking forward to. So without further ado, let's go and listen to this week's conversation. Thanks. Hey everybody, as promised, we have with us this week the one and only Joey Fletcher. Joey, welcome to our one-on-one online series that we're doing in August. Thank you so much for being with us, for taking the time. We're doing this late at night. We were filming this past 9 p.m. at night. This is what working people and dads of small kids have to do.
That's it.
Thank you so much for saying yes to doing this. How are you doing, Joey?
You're welcome. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, John. I really appreciate it. You asked me, and why not? I'm always down for an interview.
You're always down. So I got to say that you look amazing. I love your shirt tonight of choice. The color on you is wonderful. It just brings out all of the good qualities that you have.
You're pumping my tires, John. I don't know if
I'm
you're going to be
sorry,
asking
but
some
yeah,
like really
and
hard
also
questions.
that tattoo on you looks great with that shirt. So this is a good look. I'm just saying you should go with it a lot. Yeah. So yeah, we've been doing this series this month, online only. So folks, you're only going to see this online. This is not going to happen in person. And we are chatting with a few people from our church community and just having one-on-one conversations, asking some similar questions and then some different questions that are particular to the individual. And so this is basically what we're going to do. So we're going to just engage in this wonderful conversation that I'm going to have with Joey Fletcher. Thank you for being with us. All right, here we go. So we're going to start with this simple question. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's not. Tell us 3 things about you that we would like
It
to hear.
does seem it seems simple, John, but the first thing I'll tell you about me is of all the questions that you sent me to look at, this is the one that caused me the most anxiety and stress.
Okay, tell why
Because
is that?
you were forcing me to think about myself, right? And that's something that a lot of people don't do very often, is think about yourself and how to share those pieces of yourself. So even though it's probably a generic question where you just want to know a little bit about me, for me, I start to analyze, okay, how does he want me to answer this question? Does he just want those surface things about me, or does he want to know some of the deeper things about me? What is the audience looking for? So all these things kind of play through my head of what is the audience looking for? What are you looking for with the question? Instead of just answering it simply, which is, I'm an athletic comedian who's 7 of 8 kids.
Wow, those are 3 great things. That's true. That is all true. But I didn't know that necessarily about you, that you would like just go, there's obviously deeper layers to you. I know that, but sometimes people on the surface don't see that in you. You're
Right.
just this beautiful sense of like, I don't know, there's this wonderful, profound simplicity about you. That's what one of the
Mhm.
things I appreciate. And then once someone starts to talk, you're like, oh wow, there's like some really neat, deep things in there. So just starting with that is just kind of leads and lends us towards that. So yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
being vulnerable and sharing that right off the top.
but of course.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get into some of these questions. Here's another one that I asked some other people, and this one is about community. So
Mhm.
what is it that you appreciate about community in general, and then maybe more specifically, if you can speak to this, about being part of a Jesus community? How would you respond to
Right. Yeah, I mean, community is everything to me. It's the reason that I have gone to church, and it's the reason why I continue to go to church. Is the community of people and the friendships and the extended family that you build by going there. We went to church growing up, and we went to the Vineyard in Scarborough, and then when that kind of closed down, we started into home churches. And that to me that's pure community. You're meeting in someone's home with other people that you just want to do life with. And that's where I think a sense of community was starting to get built in me, was in those home churches. And I think that's something that really carried over to the village, and why we started going here and why we continue to, is there is that strong sense of community there. It's a smaller group, but that means it's more intimate and you can get to know people a little better, in my opinion. So whether it be on a Sunday or whether it's in small groups when we have those going, I think that sense of community that you can build is incredible, and it's everything, because as humans we need other humans. Like we're pack animals, right? We need that. I do anyway. And even as somebody who's a little bit more maybe introverted, I don't consider myself a big extrovert. I still understand that I need other people, and that life is made better by people that build you up. And that's what I really look for in a community, and that's what I love having in my life. As for the Jesus part, that one's a little more complicated for me as far as the Jesus community. I struggle with any kind of label around, I'll say, like religious communities or anything like that, just because unfortunately the world we live in is so polarizing and there's so many bad eggs in that basket that I have a tough time with it. So for me, when I was reading that question, I thought of it more of like a potential Jesus community, because what Jesus represents to me is love with no strings attached. It's love without asking any questions about somebody's background or who they are or the decisions they make. It's that our role here and our job while we are alive is just to love and support and build up other people. And that's what a true Jesus community is to me. Unfortunately, as I say, sometimes a bit of a bad rap gets stuck to it, and that is what it is. That's humanity in a nutshell. But yeah, I think for me, the beautiful part about a potential Jesus community is just loving people unconditionally, even though that's very difficult to do as a human. But I think the closer we can kind of push ourselves to get to that, the better off we are.
Yeah, I mean, two things I want to say to that, maybe three. Jesus was asked, what's the most important things to follow or most important commandments, and he just gave two: love God and love your neighbor. And like,
right,
just love your neighbor, the person that you see right in front of you. I love that.
right.
And then I think about the bad press that the church gets, and for good reason. Sometimes there's some dumb stuff that happens. Like I love church. I love church community. I love our community. But I'd be foolish and ignorant to say, like, there's been nothing dumb. There's been a lot of dumb things that have happened in the name of definitely religion. And then when they misuse the values of Jesus, right? I was chatting with someone the other day, and you could tell that they were like needing to be connected greater than their experience was giving them at the moment. And I was telling them about how I walked through a hard time, and my community of church community friends was just so instrumental. And I had to say, I know the church gets a bad rap for lots of things, but boy, if you could just find a healthy community, as healthy as you can, because we're people and we make mistakes, but there's just something beautiful about it. So maybe try and figure that out if you can, because you could tell like they want it, but then I'm like, I know there's hesitations, and the hesitations are for good reasons, folks. I get it, Yeah. No, that's true. And then the other thing is, like, I think we're discovering Jesus together, so we don't all have it all together. So I think that's a good place to start. The admission, like, hey, I'm not perfect, but together we're trying to figure this whole thing out,
Yeah, absolutely. I love that point you made about, when Jesus was asked, it's love your God and love your neighbor. I feel like that's the stopping point for me a lot of times, where it's like that should be the default and the fallback. Where it's like, if all else fails, fall back to that. Like, love God and love your neighbor. Like, life really can be, in my opinion, that simple. Because a lot of these decisions, when you're making these really difficult decisions, or you have things that are happening in your life, if you really break it down and sit back, it's like, how can I just make this about loving other people? And I think there's another element to that, that isn't in there, if I may, of loving yourself. Right? Like, that's one part, and maybe that's just part of that. Maybe that's part of loving God and loving your neighbor, is loving yourself, but it's never actually said. But I think that's something that's interesting, that could be a part of that.
Well, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And then in a sense, like, if we really recognize that God loves us, then we need to learn how to love ourselves. And if we can get that in us, then that helps us to love other people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds easy. It's not.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
simple, and some people want to make it more complicated,
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for answering that question. And I appreciate the honesty too, because it's important when you're talking about stuff like that. I want to switch gears to family. You are a dad of 2 kids. You are a husband to 1 wife, to Meg. And just tell me about those roles in your life, how meaningful they are to you, how much work you put into it, and why. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean those roles are everything to me. It's interesting. I'm someone who I didn't really picture myself as a father growing up. I never really had that looking forward to having my own kids one day and being a dad. I have certain men in my life where they pictured that. They knew they were going to be a dad and they kind of saw that role and thought it out. I didn't have that. Where I just kind of jumped into it. And that's how I do a lot of things. I don't try to overly plan what's coming up next.
Yep.
Because I don't want to be let down. I think it's one of the big things. I don't set those expectations because I don't want to be let down. If say I couldn't have become a father to my own kids, obviously there's tons of options out there. But yeah, I think now that I'm into it, I really am putting a lot of work into being the best dad that I can, and realizing that that does take a lot of work. Um, Becoming a parent is one of the most difficult things you can ever do. You have this other being that you're now responsible for and loves to paint your nails, and and they demand a lot of you, but there truly is nothing that can compare to the gratification that can come from being a present parent and being someone who is involved in your kids' lives and really cares about your children. Like the fulfillment that you get out of that it's indescribable, because it changes you and it makes you a different person, and I think it makes you a better person. If you're parenting correctly, you should be becoming a better person because you're becoming more selfless and you're caring about these other beings way more than yourself, because often they don't give you a choice. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. It means everything to me. Trying to become a better father each day and trying to become a better spouse and a better husband each day, for my wife, because that's another level. Now there's this other person who's equal to you. It's not a child that you're dealing with, but another adult, and you have to try to prefer them over yourself more often than not. And that definitely comes with its own trials and tribulations, as we all know, anybody who's been in any kind of long-term relationship, right? But if you could strive to be better and strive to push them forward, then if it's a mutual relationship that's working, then as you're pushing them forward, they're pushing you forward. So I mean, that's what I hope for and that's what I strive for, and I try to take being a dad and a husband as seriously as I can, because it's serious business. If you're real about it and you want to become better each day, then you got to put in the work. And that's why we started the podcast that we do with myself, my brother-in-law Dave, Brian, who works with us, and our other buddy Mark.
Yeah,
We
tell us
started this
about
podcast.
this podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So we started as Breakfast with the Bro-Laws, which is our construction company, but we just wanted to kind of have a hobby where we could make an excuse to hang out once a week and chat. And
laugh.
as we did it, yeah, and laugh. Like we all love to laugh, and we knew that we were entertaining people because we riff really well off of each other, and we like to have a good time. But I think as we got into it and kept doing more and more episodes, we started to realize that because we are all young fathers, a lot of what we were talking about kept getting circled around that. And I think the more that we met, it almost started to become a little bit of therapy for us, where we would meet together, and that's where we would talk things out, and that's where we would become vulnerable with each other and putting it out there into the world in a podcast form. So it slowly morphed and turned into the Real Dad podcast, which is now what we've rebranded it to. But yeah, we really just try to dive into big, real, vulnerable subjects around everything to do with parenting, and just life and being a man in general. And it's been a really cool experience, and it's actually pushed me to start my own therapy journey. So I've spent the last year going to therapy for the first time in my life, and that's been incredible as someone who was the prototypical didn't need therapy, where everyone can look at me from the outside and think that I have it all together because I do carry myself more, I'll say, stoically. But the reality is I think everybody needs it in some sense, or in some form. someone that they can reach out, they can talk to, and they can have real, vulnerable, just open, no holds bar conversations with, and how freeing that can feel. So yeah, I'd say I've benefited greatly from the podcast and having these moments with these guys and chatting things out and being vulnerable. And I think it's helping me become a better dad and become a better husband. And I think speaks to that community bit too, because when you have those people in your life that you can be real with and lift you up, then it just makes you a better person every day.
Um, Amazing that that led you to therapy, and it wasn't a crisis. It was just you being like self-aware and saying, oh, there's stuff that I think I should work through.
Yeah.
And that's a real healthy way of looking at it, and like you said, a lot of people just never think that they need it.
Yeah.
And I think until you like probably connect with the right person and then are having these authentic conversations, you walk away and be like, oh, I really didn't realize how much I needed that,
Yeah.
That's so good. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And being vulnerable to share that. I think that's really good and good for like men and women, but generally I feel like men avoid it even more than women do. Women are smarter and wiser and say like, I need to talk to someone. And it takes a little bit longer for a man to figure that out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So good for you. Yeah, so if you want to listen to the podcast, check it out on, I guess, Apple, Spotify, the Real Dad Podcast. I love that you guys have narrowed it down to like kind of you want to kind of focus on like that conversation, and that's where you're at. And I think that's really healthy because that's what people want, something that like you're specifically interested in and sharing all the good and the bad and the stuff that you're learning, through it. That's really good. Thanks for doing
and
that.
it was specifically because of the reasons exactly of why you just said. Like, men typically bottle everything up. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be vulnerable because they think that's weakness. Where, in my opinion, strength is being able to open up and be vulnerable and talk about what you're struggling with, because we all struggle with it. And I think when you bottle it up and you keep it in here, it's isolating and it separates you from the people around you. And we're going to say it again, community is everything. So being able to be vulnerable and talk about your struggles will help you to connect with those people around you in a real way, not just in a did you see the Jays game last night kind of way. It's saying like, no, like actually I'm really struggling with this right now, and more often than not be like, yeah, I'm right there with you, man. So I think the bonds that are created when you are open like that are ones that last a lifetime.
No, that's so good. Oh, thanks for sharing that. We're going to move on to another question, which I think you'll dig. You are also known as a contractor. You said Brolas, all that stuff, and I think you're one of the good guys in the trades. I might add, from what I can see from watching and the crew that hangs out with you, and some of the people that I know that work alongside you. So tell me about. Just specifically, this is not a trades conversation today, so you're not going to learn how to build a deck, folks. But I want to get to a specific question. Tell me how your faith or the values that, Jesus has spilled over into your life, we'll put it that way, influences the way you work, like ethics, values, work balance, anything really. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think one of the big ones there was just putting people ahead of money. I think whenever you're doing any kind of business or any kind of work, but specifically when you're starting your own business, it can be very easy to make it entirely about money because, hey, we need it.
You are making a living,
works.
right? Yeah,
exactly. But I think what being a Jesus follower has taught me is that that's not important. Like it's necessary, but it's not important. What's important are the people around you and the people that you come into contact with. So I think that's something that translates with our crew, the people that we have working with us. We always try to value them and, I don't know, be honest with them whenever we can, and really put them and their feelings and what they're going through above maybe a deadline or maybe a client that could be unhappy. It's the long term versus the short term, right? You're looking at these relationships that you're building instead of the potential money that can be made. And the same on the customer side. I think we're very good with our clients, and the reason why I will agree with you saying we're one of the good guys in the industry is that we really do. We value our clients and the people that we come into contact with, because you realize you're only going to be in this person's life for maybe 3 to 6 months, maybe even less. And the impact that I'd like to leave on their life is a positive one. Yes, we are taking a fair amount of their money, and we are delivering a good product in return. And that's the business side. But I think the other side of it is, hey, if I can affect these people in a positive way, and yeah, for me, that's just kind of being there. For Dave, that is who he is. He's my brother-in-law and co-business owner, and he's incredible with people. And the amount of our clients that he's had authentic conversations and cried with is numerous. But I think that speaks to how we do this, because in this industry, that's not typical. That is the farthest thing from typical, right? When you ask somebody, what do you picture when you picture a contractor, the last thing is Dave in their living room crying, right? But that's how we wanted to do things, and that's how we'll continue to do things, because those friendships that we end up building with these clients are ones that hopefully will last a very long time.
That's a great way to look at it, because like you are in someone's home for, like
Yeah.
you said, X amount of time. And I like the positive, we'll just even generalize it, the positive energy that can transfer from the light that can be bright, you know, in a home, right?
Yeah.
You're either adding to what's already there, or maybe just giving some that's desperately needed. It's just so
Yeah.
huge. And yeah, I think it's a great way to see it, because your job brings you right into people's homes,
Yeah.
right into their life. You're messing up their life in some ways, right? Because you're
Yeah.
building things up. And so how much more is that valuable? So that's great. And I just think that's why I asked the whole ethics thing and values, because
Right.
sometimes people just see like Jesus stuff as like religious or organized or this or that. It's like, man, if it doesn't impact the way that you treat a client, or the way you love your wife, or the way you look at your neighbor, or the way you exchange or receive money, then why the heck am I doing this? You know, it's
Yeah.
useless. It really is useless. So yeah, thanks for being one of the good guys. And I know that you'll continue doing that, and then probably even in your work ethic. I mean, I think it helps us work well too, right? It's like I want to leave this house in the best possible shape I can leave this house. I think
Yeah,
that's a good
absolutely.
thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me and for our industry, right? Like you have, in my opinion, a responsibility to leave this place in a way better state than when you entered it, right? Whether that be like emotionally or literally physically with what we build and what we do. And that makes a difference. Where again, the picture of the contractor is, especially, it's been muddied quite a bit over the years by our good friend Mike Holmes, where there unfortunately is a lot of people out there that don't care that much about what they do.
Yeah.
And they're just worried about getting the money and getting out, and that doesn't honor the person or the house that you're in.
Yeah.
Where I think that's something that got instilled into me, was like, no, I want to leave everything in this place better than when I came in, if I have the ability to do so. So
Yeah.
I lean into that as much as I can.
And I think on the money thing, it's a healthy view to just like, you know, and I'm not trying to over spiritualize, but like trust God to provide. So you're like, this is the job I'm called to do, and I
Right.
trust. Of course, you got to work on details. You got to price things well. Like I get all that stuff, but like in the end, you're like, I trust that God's going to provide a living for us as I do this good work that I feel gifted at and called to. I think whatever industry we're in, and that's really,
Yeah.
really important. Yeah.
Especially the beginning and when you're first starting a business, because even though we had quite the leg up, because when we started the business, we were coming off of HGTV. So
Yeah.
we had a backing. We knew that people knew us, but those first 2 years were still a struggle, and it was just Dave and I. And you don't know when the next job's coming in. So that was an exercise in faith for sure.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of that where like we're 1 week out from finishing this, and we don't know what the next project's gonna be. It's like,
What's
all right,
coming next? Yeah.
I guess this one's in God's hands.
Well, it's a good perspective, and
Mhm.
it's also a fun, I know, adventurous, but a great way to live. I think so. So yeah, that's good. Okay. We have a couple more questions. So this one is totally shift of gears. I talk about this a lot with friends, neighbors, whoever, like Christians, not so Christian, whatever. And here's the scoop: we welcome doubts and questions in our church community generally. We think it makes our faith more authentic and honest. And I think without it, you're fooling yourself if you don't have questions, if you don't doubt things, if you think you're always like got it all together, which is not true.
Yeah.
So how do you process things that have changed in your perspective over the years? And then anything, like you brought that up earlier about, the community thing, anything specifically you're questioning, but how do you basically, first question, how do you process things that have changed in your mind over the years that you've been questioning or doubting? What do you think about that stuff?
Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. I do. All right.
Yeah, first of all, I want to share an appreciation for you and your ability to give a community the ability to doubt, where that isn't typical within the religious space. Is usually you want to shy away from doubt any chance that you can, because where there's a seed of doubt, then you can be swoon away.
Yeah.
Where in reality, we have to be able to doubt. Like, I totally agree with you on that fact, because that is human nature. We have to question things in order to truly understand it for ourselves. Otherwise, in my opinion, your faith is just based on what you've learned and what you've seen. And this is I'll call it a struggle, because it is a struggle to doubt and wrestle with your faith. And I don't see how it couldn't be, because when you're truly doubting and struggling with it, it's a hard road to walk, and it's one that I think I've gone through for the past few years, to really kind of struggle through my faith. And I think it's a good thing to do, because I find that I'm making it my own. And I think that's something that I've worked through therapy over this past year too. Is I've realized that a lot of my faith was just based on my parents and how they raised me and the things that they showed me and taught me, which is incredible. And those are the building stones. But at the same time, I don't think I ever really made faith my own. I know you shared this a couple of Sundays ago. Actually, you're sharing that about your son Jake, where that moment where he kind of made faith his own, and he took the time at camp to call you and tell you about it. And I think that resonated with me really well, because it's something that for me at 30, whatever, 34, realizing that I never really did make faith my own. It was always something that was a constant, and it was just kind of in the back of my head, right? I grew up with it. It's always been in my life. It was just there, but I had never challenged it to make it mine. So that's been a walk that I've been going through for a while now. And it's a tough road to walk, because you're questioning things that you didn't think could be questioned, because it's a part of how you grew up. This was a knowing. I knew these things, where it's like, okay, if I'm going to challenge them, then that means I don't know them. But hey, that's a part of living, and that's a part of growing up, and that's a part of hopefully gaining a deeper faith, because you're actually challenging these things to make them your own and make them make sense to yourself. So I think it's an important part of anybody's faith journey to be able to doubt and challenge and walk through that. And just making sure that you do that with community, because I've also watched people doubt and challenge, but try to do it on their own. And when you do that, it's really difficult to find answers, because that's one thing, as any Jesus follower knows. He's not speaking out loud. He's not yelling things at you, and he's not going to answer your questions directly. But you will be given opportunities to see the answers to your questions. And I think a lot of that comes through community, because now you're surrounding yourself and you're with people that are like-minded, that are trying to lift you up, not put you down, and trying to walk through this with you. So it's really important to me that if I'm going to doubt and I'm going to challenge, I do that with the people in my life that I want to be in my life.
That's a really healthy thing. I think a lot of people, when they doubt, they have so many faith questions that they think like their faith is blowing up on them.
Mm-hmm.
They feel for some reason they need to figure it out by themselves, or they need to walk away. And I'm not saying that for a 2-week period or a time frame, you're just like, oh man, I don't know about the right. But like, I think if you really want to fight with it in a healthy way, then you want to do it amongst people that you love and that love you, and be free to say whatever you got, whatever question you have, and have it kind of in community. Because I also think, like, when I don't have it together, I trust that you maybe in that season do somewhat. And so then I'm like, I'm good. Joey's got me for these next few months, even though I feel I'm like in la la land, and that's the beautiful thing of community. It can be reversed that way too. So I think that's huge. And then I think for anybody's faith to be their own, like, you have to fight with it a bit. Like, if you don't fight with it, well, it's not worth anything, There's a cool tradition in Judaism that they like literally tear apart stories in the Old Testament that they almost like metaphorically don't look the same. It's like literally ripping it apart,
Right.
and it could be hours. And they question every single aspect of the story. And then at the end, they try and piece it together. But the
Mm.
only way that it makes sense is if they actually allow the tearing apart process to happen.
Right.
And that happens in our hearts. That happens as we think through things. That happens in our faith journey. And if we don't allow it to happen, then like you're right. It's never going to be ours, and not ours in a sense, like in a selfish way, but like that I feel like it's really mine, you know?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do think a little bit in a selfish way, right? I think it kind of has to be because it is you and it's your perspective and your view on the world, and nobody else has that perspective. It's yours. And I think a lot of times people can get trapped in this, especially if you're new to faith and new to religion, where you're thinking, okay, like if I'm going to get into this, I'm going to have to follow all the rules that everybody else follows, and I'm going to have to believe all of the things that everybody in that faith journey believes. But it's like, no, it's yours. It's your perspective. And there is going to be certain things that you're going to disagree with because a lot of these stories and these things that you're told happened thousands of years ago. They're going to be things that don't match up with the way that life is lived now, right? So there's going to be wrestling points along the way, but like we have been saying, the important thing is that you're doing that with a community because that's how you gain answers. That's how you get constructive doubting.
Yeah. And a lot of it comes because people feel like they can't disagree with someone that is, I'm going to use a weird term here, like brother or sister in Christ, like community. They feel
Yeah.
like they can't disagree with them and still be connected. It's like, ooh,
Yeah.
if we don't see eye to eye on that issue, I
Mm.
don't know, maybe we just can't do this anymore. And it's like, no, wait a
Right.
second. Well, maybe there's a way that you
Yeah.
can see something a little bit differently, but still come in like common ground on some really other important things, you know?
Yes, exactly.
So that's, I think, key as well. Man, great. I love that you're willing to process and like tear things apart, uh,
Mhm.
and do it in the context of community. That's just beautiful to me to hear you say it that way, to hear you articulate it that way. So, oh, okay. So we got one more question.
All right.
This is either a really simple question or maybe it ends up being like a crazy one, but I've asked this to everybody. So the question is, why Jesus? Why do you still follow Jesus, or why do you still figure out why you should, and what intrigues you, excites you about him these days? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I touched on this a little in the beginning with the Jesus community, but I think for me, it is just being able to prefer other people and being able to love other people properly. That's one thing that's always intrigued me since I was a kid. There's 8 billion people in this world. And more often than not, every one of them is claiming to be right. So we're not all right, but we can all find a common ground. And in my opinion, Jesus wasn't here to say that you're all wrong. He was here to say that you're all loved. And that was the message that he wanted to get across. And I think that's the one that we're meant to try to continue to get across. It's like, you're going to be okay and you are loved, regardless of how difficult life is, because life is really difficult
Times, yeah.
for a lot of people and for everybody in different ways in different walks of life, right? But to have that sense of it doesn't matter how difficult it is, there's a God who loves you, and there are people on this earth that will love you regardless of what you're going through. I think that message and that ability that we have as humans, like we can convey that to somebody else and truly change their life. It's unfortunate that those, like we said, those waters have been muddied. That it's unfortunate that people suck, and that's just a part of
Yeah.
being human. But I think we have that ability to do that, and I think that's really cool, and that's something that's always kind of drawn me in, and the thing that I always kind of fall back with, no matter how much I am struggling through my faith and doubting things. I think that being kind of one of the cornerstones that I can fall back to is like being Christ-like is just to love people, and it really can be that simple sometimes.
Yeah. And there's a beautiful mystery in it, because sometimes people think like, because I'm a pastor, I have to tell everybody, like
Mm.
in every conversation, something spiritual or something,
Right.
whatever. And I'm like, I really feel that one of my personal like purposes, missions is just to be present with people and share love. And I actually believe I'm crazy enough to believe that somehow Jesus is present in those moments, even though I never said his name. I never used the word church. I never said the word God, because I just feel like you're right. Like Jesus is present in how we love people. That's beautiful. You said it so well. You said Jesus didn't come to tell you that you're all wrong, but that you're all loved. Like you might write a book on that one day, Joey. Who knows?
It's the first time I've ever said that. So
It's good. It's good. That was the way it came out was beautiful. So wow, thanks for sharing that. I just think it's neat for like every week people are hearing like different reasons why, like how people answer that question, and just the way you answered it was uniquely your way. So thanks for sharing that. So this is kind of the end of our conversation. We're done. I just want to say thanks so much for being honest and sharing all the stuff you shared. I also want to say I love watching and observing you and your family from like as a friend, as a person that's in your life, just to see like how you're just figuring it out in such a beautiful way, asking help when you need it, helping others when they need it. Like it's just, I'm honored to watch that process. So yeah, I want to thank you for that. And that's it. We're done.
Well, thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I enjoy getting myself out of my shell because, as I say, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. Even though it may not come across that way, I still, even leading up to this, was like, oh, should I do this? Should I do this? But I think pushing yourself to do stuff like this, be vulnerable, be willing to talk about yourself and your journey, then maybe this helps one other person out there, and that makes it all worth it, right?
Love it. I love that you said yes before you were sure, and then you still said yes even after you were questioning it. And everyone, you should know, this is very late at night, so I think we got some serious vibes going on even for late at night. And you should also know that we did almost half the interview unrecorded. And then I realized it wasn't recording, and Joey, without even like, he didn't make me feel bad at all. He's just like, oh, it's okay, John. Do this all the time with the podcast. I'm like, oh, I feel like an idiot. But just know that the stuff you didn't hear was gold, and the stuff you heard was gold too. So it's all,
I am sad that they got to miss your face when you did realize it, because that was pure horror that I saw in your face.
I felt terrible. Like, what? I'm wasting your time. But anyway, that's a scoop. All right, so we're all done. Thank you so much for joining us. And whenever I see you in person again, which will probably be shortly, I'll give you a big hug, and vice versa. So yeah, thanks. All right. Peace and love.
Good.
Bye. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed being part of that conversation. So many wonderful things to take from the conversation with Joey one-on-one. I want to thank him again for just being with us and taking the time late at night to be in this interview. If you have any questions about the Village, send us an email at connect@thevillagewhitby.ca. If you don't know about us so much and you'd like to know about us before you check us out, find us on Instagram and Facebook, and our website is thevillagewhitby.ca. At the end of this video, there'll be some information about giving if you have any questions about that. But otherwise, we're really just glad that you hung out with us, that you joined us this week, that you listened in. We hope that it was beneficial, it encouraged you, it challenged you in some way, shape, or form. We will see you next week for the next installment of One-on-One. Peace, love, recycle.